And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
In our first video about the finale, we looked at the tragic downfall of Daenerys Targaryen. So now here's our take on what the rest of the Game of Thrones finale was all about, on why Bran became king, and the messages this final episode leaves us with about incremental progress, post-medieval history, and good government in our times too.
Maybe the decision about what's best for everyone should be left to, well, everyone.
Before we go on, we want to talk about this video's sponsor. NordVPN is the best VPN or virtual private network out there. Right now, they're offering our viewers a limited time deal. All you have to do is click the link in the description below, nordvpn.com/thetake, to get 75% off a 3-year plan. That comes out to just $2.99 per month. And if you enter the code THETAKE, you'll also get an extra month of NordVPN for free. Almost as soon as the story destroys the Iron Throne, symbolically announcing the end of absolute rule and the creation of a new world, the characters move on to deciding who should be the next monarch.
We don't have a king or queen.
You're the most powerful people in Westeros. Choose one.
This undermines the gravity of the lesson we just saw in Daenerys' tragic downfall. Even if the king has no fancy chair to sit on, this society still insists on concentrating power in one sovereign. So why does Bran the Broken end up on the throne which is no longer iron? The story has signaled to us that the only person fit to rule is someone who doesn't want to.
I never wanted it, but I accepted it because the North is my home.
And Bran announces in episode 4 that he doesn't want anything.
I don't really want anymore.
The king who doesn't want on the throne is a neat solution given the story's moral of how ultimate power corrupts.
You will be my hand.
No, Your Grace, I don't want it.
And I don't want to be king.
But in reality, it seems like an oversimplification. While it may be true that, as Douglas Adams wrote in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it is a well-known fact that those people who must want to rule people are ipso facto those least suited to do it. This doesn't automatically make the inverse true, that anyone who doesn't want to rule is therefore good at ruling. We have to assume that being a good ruler also requires a bit of get up and go, someone who's motivated to make things happen for their people.
You don't have that kind of drive, that hubris? How in the hell are you going to make the kind of decisions that stump every other person in this country?
Bran is evidently the big picture guy. Tyrion worries about clean water and funding the ships, or brothels, while Bran looks into the distance to ponder whether dragons will ever return. After Tyrion asks if Bran would accept the crown, Bran says,
"Why do you think I came all this way?"
suggesting he foresaw this outcome all along. This characteristic lack of interference as he waits for events to play out,
The things we do for love.
offering only fragments of insight when he clearly knows much more,
He'll come for me.
is what can be infuriating about Bran. He behaves like an all-knowing but passive observer. While the story punished Daenerys' claims of divine right, Bran truly is a kind of demigod, and it's hard to know what to make of this choice to put a godlike being in power. In a modern context, this could even translate to putting some kind of computer or internet-like hive mind in charge, which is intriguing but terrifying. For some reason, as they debate what to do, the lords and ladies of Westeros defer to their talkative prisoner, Tyrion.
You are not here to speak. Everyone has heard enough words from you.
You're right. But it's not for you to decide.
Who decides the key to a successful government is the campaign message.
There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story.
As mankind's living memory and the collection of all our stories, Bran embodies what is most valuable about our species, the core of humanity that the Night King wanted to wipe out.
He wants to erase this world, and I am its memory.
Thus, even if it doesn't make the most sense to jump to the conclusion that Bran would be a better ruler than the far savvier and more invested Sansa, who, let's be honest, is a little unfairly passed over here, by crowning Bran, Game of Thrones is symbolically championing the prime value and importance of the stories we tell.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories.
A good story rallies nations behind not only a ruler, but also a set of shared ideas, values, and principles. It's the emotional glue that binds a people together. The darker side of this, though, is the observation that the reason we elect our rulers is highly divorced from how good they will actually be at ruling. And that explains more than a few of our modern society's problems.
So I'm not sure about this part where I say I want to be president for all Americans. I mean, do I? You know, all of them?
How about real Americans?
Oh yeah, that's good. And then we can figure out what I mean later.
Show creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss said that they were delivering the planned ending that Martin shared with them.
All hail Bran the Broken.
So we can assume Martin also intended for Bran to end up on the throne, and Daenerys to go bad. Still, both of these events may come across as more coherently fleshed out in his rendition. The pilot of the show, like the opening of A Song of Ice and Fire, is really all about Bran.
Don't look away.
This sweet summer child losing his legs is the impetus for this whole collective journey.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Yet along the way, the show lost track of and frequently sidelined this character. Thus, when he returns and is revealed to be the key to the story's endgame, this doesn't quite have the clarity and resonance we might imagine it could have. It would be impossible to choose a wiser ruler than the Raven who knows pretty much everything. We might even say he's reminiscent of Plato's ideal of the philosopher king. He represents that the leader should feel his people's concerns as his own, to the point of basically becoming an abstract collection of his people's knowledge and will.
He is our memory, the keeper of all our stories. The wars, weddings, births, massacres, famines.
Ultimately, the new king's epithet, Bran the Broken,
We serve at your pleasure, King Bran the Broken.
leans into the way that the show has tried to give affirmation to characters who have been dismissed or othered in some way, like the many literal and figurative bastards who are the focus of the story.
I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things.
In the world of the earlier seasons, the Seven Kingdoms were very much separate feudal territories, bickering, plotting, and vying for dominance.
And I know that our enemies hate each other almost as much as they hate us.
So the far more realistic ending to this story, given history and what we've seen of Westeros society, would be a strategic marriage. The War of the Roses between the House of Lancaster and the House of York, which inspired the feud of the early seasons between House Lannister and House Stark, ended with the Lancastrian Henry Tudor returning from exile and solidifying his claim to the throne by marrying Elizabeth of York. Tyrion Lannister and Sansa Stark would represent the Game of Thrones version of that. They're also the two characters who most embody realpolitik, the pragmatic or realistic approach to politics which takes the world as it is, rather than trying to mold it to fit a particular ideology or moral standard. Tyrion learned this art from the master, his father, Tywin.
The Tyrell army is helping us to win this war. Do you really think it's wise to refuse them?
There's nothing to refuse. This is a plot. Plots are not public knowledge.
While Sansa learned it primarily from her enemies, like Cersei.
Learned a great deal from her.
And indeed, Game of Thrones has been at its best and most sophisticated when it relishes the game of government.
Our last working mine ran dry 3 years ago.
Then how do we pay for anything?
The Crown owes the Iron Bank of Bravos a tremendous amount of money.
As Martin once put it, what was Aragorn's tax policy? Instead of following in this spirit, the finale of Game of Thrones shows the remaining lords and ladies of Westeros calmly and nobly agreeing in a matter of minutes to a more enlightened form of rule.
To Brandon of House Stark, I say aye.
It seems almost everyone present has learned and grown so much from the recent turmoil, they just genuinely want what's best for Westeros and no longer care for the self-interests that have always driven them. This sudden effacement of their previous characteristics is what makes the scene ring false. Like we're seeing characters give voice to the storyteller's conclusion, rather than still acting in accordance with their human nature. So what do the nobility of Game of Thrones decide the new, better government looks like? First of all, it's clear that their idea of progress is incremental change, and they laugh down Sam's proposal of democratic voting.
Maybe we should give the dogs a vote as well.
Tyrion ends up creating an elective monarchy, which should theoretically save the people of Westeros from the terrible airs of a hereditary monarchy.
From now on, rulers will not be born. They will be chosen. On this spot are the lords and ladies of Westeros.
There have been a number of elective monarchies throughout different eras of history. Often, though, elective monarchies have tended to become hereditary ones in practice, as acting monarchs end up wanting their children to rule. But at least the ruler's control now has more checks and balances, and in theory, bloodline is no longer the deciding factor of who should rule. In fact, none of our last remaining Targaryen, Lannister, or Stark heirs have yet procreated, or seem to have babies on the mind, suggesting it's very possible some of these ancient lineages could fall out of existence. In broad strokes, the finale gestures at major developments in post-medieval society as the foundations of modern Europe emerged. After the Wars of the Roses, the power of feudal lords began to wane, due in part to the nobility's losses of life in their extensive warring, and even more so to the effects of the Black Death. The bubonic plague wiped out so much of the population that labor shortages gave the people a little more power to demand better working conditions. In Game of Thrones, the White Walkers are a very apt stand-in for the plague, and indeed the double whammy of fighting two brutal battles against formidable disease on one front and humankind's wars on the other is exactly what we see in the final season of Game of Thrones. After this, just as in history, the human species does survive, but the heavy casualties of both struggles fundamentally remake society. Meanwhile, the post-medieval period saw increased travel and trade with foreign countries, which reshaped European economies. Arya going off to find what would presumably correspond to the New World,
what's west of Westeros,
is a gesture toward the Age of Discovery. This age prospered especially under England's Queen Elizabeth I, who seems to be the inspiration for Sansa's future as Queen of the North. In the scene of her coronation, she wears her red hair down like Elizabeth's and has no man at her side, just as the Virgin Queen skillfully used her unmarried status to her advantage as a ruler. Europe's growing emphasis on trade saw the rise of the merchant class, who ushered in early capitalism to replace feudalism. We can see this in the way that two prominent members of the Small Council in the finale are not born lords but have risen to high status through their own efforts.
These projects will begin as soon as the Master of Coin and Lord of Lofty Titles provides funding.
The increasing wealth of the merchant class prefigured the modern middle class, and as they got wealthier, the kings got poorer. In fact, historically in the post-medieval period, the monarchy actually became more centralized and powerful than it had been under feudalism. But ultimately, the show's emphasis on Tyrion and the Small Council is hinting at the fact that, over time, monarch's absolute rule gives way to parliamentary governments.
Good. Sons of kings can be cruel and stupid, as you well know.
The scene we get of the Small Council starting its rule implies that Bran is closer to a figurehead,
Do carry on with the rest.
while Tyrion as Hand actually leads the nitty-gritty of ruling.
It is my theory, based on my years of work on the costly rock sewers, that clean water leads to a healthier population.
In that respect, our video arguing that Tyrion would end up ruler came pretty close.
Because you wanted Tyrion to come through and be the boss, didn't you?
Me personally, yes.
That would have been a great finish.
The independent North
The North will remain an independent kingdom.
could correspond to Scotland, which fought hard at various points throughout history for its independence from England. While of course in a modern context, Sansa's succession can't help making us think of Brexit. Meanwhile, a lot of what we're seeing feels like it's trying to talk about today, as Tyrion's elective monarchy is a kind of feudal version of the Electoral College at the center of US elections. And when the powerful elite of Westeros laugh off the idea of letting the people decide their own fates,
I'll ask my horse.
this might make us think of the fact that even in our modern representative government, big money interests and the powerful few still have the lion's share of control over which options get viably presented to the average voter.
Ma'am, it's Amy. She sounds uncomfortable, like she's with a member of the public.
Okay, that's what she's got, one of the normals here.
The episode was full of callbacks to previous lines,
Love is the death of duty. He knew he'd never walk again, so he learned to fly.
I once brought a jackass and a honeycomb into a brothel.
to previous visuals, and the fulfillment of foreshadowing. It had the feeling of a circle, returning key characters to where they've been. Arya makes good on what she told Lady Crane she wanted to do in season 6.
But what's west of Westeros?
I don't know.
Nobody does. That's where all the maps stop.
The in-show history book, with its meta title, A Song of Ice and Fire, reminds us that Sam disliked its original name.
A chronicle of the wars following the death of King Robert I. You don't like the title? What would you call it then?
Possibly something a bit more poetic?
Here the book is presented by Sam, the story's stand-in for Martin himself.
I helped him with the title.
The omission of Tyrion's contribution
What does he say about me?
I don't believe you're mentioned.
Is a throwback to Varys' speech.
The king won't give you any honors. The histories won't mention you. But we will not forget.
Tyrion moving the chairs around before the small council meeting mirrors the way he awkwardly drags his chair during a meeting with Tywin in Season 3. And when he tells Jon,
A few years as Hand of the King would make anyone want to piss off the edge of the world.
this is a reference to Tyrion doing exactly that in Season 1. This exchange between Davos and Bran
Or soon there won't be no more coin.
Anymore.
You're master of grammar now, too.
is a shout out to his old buddy Stannis Baratheon's habit of policing grammar.
And it's 4 less fingernails to clean.
Fewer. How many men do we have in the north to fight in? 10,000 less?
Fewer.
Brienne filling out Jaime's page in the Book of the Brothers fulfills a moment from Season 4.
It's the duty of the Lord Commander to fill those pages. And there's still room left on mine.
Arya's final scene looking forward at the bow of her ship is a callback to the episode The Children, which is actually the one we highlighted in our collaboration series The Best of Thrones. The Season 4 finale was all about young life rising up and overthrowing the old establishments, creating a new world in its image. Just like The Children, the finale ends with a choral rendition of the main theme. And this very final shot of the finale is filled with quite a few children following Jon Snow into the frontier of the north beyond Westeros. As Bran the Broken is revealed to be the Aragorn of this story, Jon, its ring-bearer or throne destroyer, is likewise very much broken by the weight of what he's just done.
You are my queen. Now. And always.
At the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo can't return to regular life in the Shire, but leaves Middle-earth for the Undying Lands. And likewise, Jon goes north, cast out of mainland Westeros and heading toward a presumably simpler, more spiritual life. The farewell between the Stark siblings,
The north is free thanks to you.
But they lost their king.
parallels the scene in The Return of the King when the hobbits are saying goodbye to Frodo.
We set out to save the Shire, Sam. And it has been saved. But not for me.
If we buy into the idea that the Starks have the strongest moral compass in this story, then we might read their traveling off in different directions as an optimistic message that their honorable, egalitarian values are spreading around the world. Grey Worm and the Unsullied are perhaps the most ill-served by the finale. After Grey Worm refuses to be bought with the offer of Highgarden,
We do not need payment. We need justice.
he leads the Unsullied off to Missandei's homeland, where they once talked of going together.
My people are not peaceful. We will protect you.
The two groups of outsiders unfortunately end up painted in a problematic way as the merciless conquerors, which is a disappointing end for some of the only remaining non-white characters on the show. What fails to satisfy about the Game of Thrones finale, or more to the point, what fails to be iconic about it, is that the final episode wraps things up neatly, almost with a bow, instead of raising questions or planting haunting thought starters, as the most influential TV endings have done. The finale concluded a season that disappointed many for a variety of reasons. Ultimately, though, what was most tonally jarring about the finale was that it more or less transformed Westeros into the world as it ought to be, rather than as it is. For years, the show was always at its best when it didn't give us what we, or our heroes, wanted.
The Lannisters send their regards.
And this neat utopian resolution feels at odds with the kind of story Game of Thrones once was.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
It wasn't about black and white morality, but a world of gray. It showed us appearances disjointed from their inner natures. And most of all, it gave us a world in which good often didn't triumph.
Burn the villages, burn the farms. Let them know what it means to choose the wrong side.
In which the bad guys, more often than not, won by playing dirty. And the best of plans fell victim to accident, chaos, and randomness.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
In short, Game of Thrones combined fantasy and medieval historical elements with the characteristics of our own world.
The powerful have always preyed on the powerless. That's how they became powerful in the first place.
When the show opens, this is a world that believes magic is extinct, and we witness the story of what happens when magic re-enters a cynical society, as Westeros confronts two opposite surreal threats: the ice of the White Walkers and the fire of the dragons. If, as Martin has said, the White Walkers correspond to climate change and the dragons represent nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction, then both underline how, while magic sounds fun in theory, in practice, it's more often terrifying. Magic really just means what is beyond our understanding and our control. It's those greater forces which have the potential to overwhelm and destroy us. So ultimately, Game of Thrones fears the magic of its story and sets it up as the antagonist that regular, decent people have to band together to overcome. Game of Thrones uses magic both to recall a past in which mankind was more at the mercy of its environment and to speak to new present dangers humankind could face, reminding us that despite our advanced society, we are still fragile and more vulnerable to extinction than we know. As scary magic is forced into remission, gone for now but likely to return someday, balance is restored. And this first sign of green tells us spring is coming once again. Society's best hope appears to be this scruffy group of misfits who've made it through hell and back thanks to their level-headed wits and a lot of luck. And while it's been a long time coming, it seems that for Westeros, at last, a change is gonna come.
I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me.
You were exactly where you were supposed to be.
This video is sponsored by NordVPN. This amazing VPN lets you bypass geo-blocking to access fantastic streaming sites so that no matter where you are, all your favorite movies and shows are at your fingertips. NordVPN servers are lightning fast, so you can stream HD content without lagging footage. And with just one account, you can connect as many as 6 devices simultaneously. Plus, your privacy is their first priority. They have double data encryption for added security. And right now, they're offering a special deal to our viewers. Click the link in the description below. NordVPN.com/thetake to get 75% off a 3-year plan. If you enter the code THETAKE, you'll also get a bonus month for free. But that's only for a limited time, so go to NordVPN.com/thetake to sign up today.